This video will provide a high-level overview of the synthesizing grammar. We have 8 types of rules here, and they're executed from top to bottom, except I'd like to show you a diagram here. The rules are executed first the feature copying rules, then the spellout rules, Clitic rules, constituent movement rules, phrase structure rules, and then the pronoun rules. The pronoun rules decide where we can use a pronoun and then provide the proper surface form of that pronoun. Then after the pronoun rules have been executed, we go back and execute the phrase structure rules again, because sometimes pronouns need to be positioned differently than their corresponding nouns. So the phrase structure rules get executed twice. And then after the second time, we go to the word morphophonemic rules and find replace rules. So now I'll briefly describe each of these 8 types of rules. First we have the feature copying and setting rules. These rules are for agreement, setting up agreement. When I talked about the structural adjustment rules, we copied features from one word to another word, but that was generally from a word that's about to be deleted to a new word that's being inserted. That's not agreement. These rules, feature copying and setting rules, these are for agreement. For example, in English, verbs agree in person and number with their subjects. In some languages, adjectives may agree in number or class or gender with their nouns, etc. So that's what these rules are for. Here we build a structure. So this copies 2 features, number and person, from nouns that are in subject-noun phrases, and they get copied from the noun to the verb. So these rules copy features from one constituent in a sentence to another constituent in the same sentence. Now sometimes we need to override the agreement rules. For example, if the subject is one of us, we don't want first plural. The subject will be us, but we're saying one of us. That's first plural. But for one of us, we actually want third singular. If we're saying has to, one of us has to go to the store, for example. So these rules override the feature copying rules, the agreement rules. So here we have an input structure and an output structure, and when the input structure matches, then the features in the output structure will be set and override the feature copying rules. Let's go to the spellout rules. These rules provide a lot of morphology. This rule has 16 layers, and each layer has multiple rows. We used to have these constituents inserted by individual rules. For example, one rule would insert the word finish for completive aspect. Another rule would insert not for negative polarity. Another rule would insert certainly for emphatic negative polarity. And then putting all those constituents in order in the verb phrase was extremely difficult. So we developed what we call verb phrase builder rules, where now for each of these lines we build a structure and we include various features, and when this structure is found, then that row will be executed and insert this entire string with what we call a tag called preverbal, and then the phrase structure rule for verb phrases will put this preverbal constituent before the verb. So these rules, these spellout rules, they add morphology, but we include phrase builder rules which can build up an entire phrase. And then we have the Clitic rules. Functional typological grammarians tell us that there are 3 different types of clitics. There are preclitics, which attach to the beginning of the first constituent in a phrase or clause. Second position clitics, which attach to the end of the first constituent in the phrase or clause. And postclitics, which attach to the end of the last constituent in the phrase or clause. So these rules let us insert these 3 types of clitics. This is a simple rule, inserting just one clitic. If you have a table, if you have multiple clitics, you can build a table. English doesn't need that, so we have this. After the clitic rules, we have movement rules. And movement rules, these are identical to the structural adjustment rules, which we talked about earlier, but these are used to move constituents. For example, this one is for building questions, and move all interrogative nouns to CP-spec. That's from principles and parameters. I know nobody uses that term anymore. You can call these constituents anything you want. But these rules move constituents into other constituents within the same sentence. English question formation is actually fairly complex. So there are multiple movement rules. Let's go to the phrase structure rules. These rules put all of the constituents in their proper order. This one applies to just noun phrases. And you can enter groups like leading punctuation. And you put in your punctuation, then conjunctions, our relationship markers, qualifiers, specifiers, pre-head modifiers. Finally, we get to the head, which includes the noun and the first word of a compound noun. Then there are post-head modifiers, etc. So these rules put all of the constituents in their proper order. Then finally, at the end of a noun phrase comes trailing punctuation, whether it's a trailing comma or a quotation mark. Then there are the pronoun and switch reference rules. This is a two-step process. First, we identify where pronouns can be used. And these rules are again identical to the structural adjustment rules, but they're used to identify where pronouns can be used. So here are two noun phrases, and we specify certain features. We specify that they have the same noun index, the same indices. Then in the output structure, we set the surface realization to personal pronoun. There are others, etc. After I've identified where a pronoun can be used, the spellout rules look for those features. For example, here, if the surface realization is personal pronoun, here we will provide the proper pronoun. So we have singular subject, plural subject, singular non-subject, and plural non-subject. These are for the personal pronouns. There are reflexive pronouns, reciprocal pronouns, possessive pronouns, locative pronouns, relative pronouns, etc. And then after the pronoun rules, we have word morphophonemic rules. Prior to the phrase structure rules, when you build input structures for all of these, constituent order is never important. You can build the input structures and put in the constituents in any order that you want. But after the phrase structure rules have been executed, now order is significant. For example, the word morphophonemic rules can't be executed until after all of the constituents are in their proper order. So for example, this rule will change a to an if the next word begins with a vowel. But there's one exception, eunuch. We don't say an eunuch, we say a eunuch. So that's what the morphophonemic rule does. This changes a to an before the word our. And then finally we have the find replace rules. These rules search the final translation. Well, it's almost the final translation. They search it for a specified string and then change it to whatever you specify. For example, I will is changed to I'll. Do not is changed to don't. So these rules search for a particular string that you specify and then change it to a new string that you specify. So that's a high-level overview of the synthesizing grammar.